Okay, thank you, Jihan. Good morning, everybody, or good morning from Europe. It depends on which part of the world you're in. It's my great pleasure to welcome everybody to today's Bussola Institute webinar. This is, for me, a very special one, as our panel of speakers today consists of 4 very eminent and distinguished people, each one of them with a deep interest in using data to build better schools. As the legendary engineer, statistician, and business consultant William Edwards Deming once put it, and I know Andreas uses this from time to time, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Data-driven decision-making involves the careful collecting of data, carrying out in-depth analysis, and basing decisions on insights derived from that analysis. And the world of education and training and skills is no exception. Good policy making in education requires good data. Andreas Schleicher and his team at the OECD Programme for International Student Assessment, PISA, are world leaders in the collection and analysis of education-related data. They believe passionately in the overriding importance of having the best possible data and high-quality analysis, setting meaningful targets and measurable goals to help every student, every teacher, every principal, and every school to succeed and excel. PISA, as you know, is universally regarded as the world's most comprehensive and reliable indicator of student capabilities, and is used as a tool by countries and economies across the world to fine-tune their education policies. In the year 2015, 193 countries worldwide committed to achieving the 17 sustainable goals of the United Nations. The extent to which many of these goals are achieved largely depends on what is happening in today's classrooms. Goal 4, which commits to quality education for all, is intentionally not limited to foundation knowledge and skills, such as literacy, mathematics, and science, but also highlights and emphasizes learning to live together sustainably. This goal inspired the OECD PISA team to include global competence in its metrics for quality, equity, and effectiveness in education. PISA assessed global competence for the first time ever as part of PISA 2018. And Andreas will tell us about all of this in a few minutes. A global competence framework was designed by the team as a tool for policymakers, government leaders, and educators interested in nurturing global competence among young people worldwide. As the world begins to tentatively enter the COVID-19 recovery phase, there are many calls now to renew the world's commitment to sustainable goals. The pandemic has fundamentally changed the role of teachers and the delivery of education across the world. In this context, equipping our students with the knowledge and skills necessary to achieve their full potential and to contribute to an increasingly interconnected world needs to become a more central preoccupation of policymakers and educators across the globe. Today's webinar will look at how the results of PISA 2018 will facilitate us in offering timely and targeted support to help countries provide the best and most appropriate education for all students, to help them to develop a reliable compass to navigate an increasingly complex, ambiguous, and volatile post-pandemic world. We will also explore how Europe and the Gulf can draw on the significant experience of countries in both regions in the areas of intercultural integration, cultural diversity, and tolerance to support cooperation between policymakers, leaders, and educators in developing equitable and effective global competence education. Now, as I said, we explain, we have 4 speakers, and we will begin. Our first speaker today will be Andreas Schleicher. Andreas, I know quite a lot of you know him well, but for those of you who don't, Andreas is the Director for Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. He's also the Special Advisor to the Secretary General and a key member of the OECD's senior management team. He initiated and continues to oversee the Programme for International Student Assessment, PISA, in addition to which he guides several other major OECD programs. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest international authorities on education policy and practice. For over 20 years, Andreas has worked side by side with prime ministers, ministers, and education leaders all around the world to support them in their efforts to improve quality and equity in education and to implement forward-looking policies and practices. He continues to write extensively on education and skills. And for me, and I want to highlight this today, his 2018 publication entitled World Class, How to Build a 21st Century School System, in which he brought together a lifetime of wisdom and experience in one place, is a book that, in my opinion, should be required reading for every policymaker, educator, and education innovator across the globe. Andreas is the recipient of numerous honours and awards and is widely recognised as the greatest educator of this era. Today, Andreas will describe and analyse some of what the PISA team has learned from this significant global competence evaluation. It has been my great honour to know Andreas for indeed something around 20 years, to have worked with him at OECD and to have learned an enormous amount from this incredible man. Over to you, Andreas.
Thanks so much for the very kind introduction, John. And obviously, these are difficult times for education. If you think about, in March last year, we had 1.5 billion young people locked out from their schools. I know teachers were trying to make up a lot through remote learning, but we've also learned during the crisis that learning and schooling is not just a transactional business. It's most and foremost a relational business. Now, school is the place where we meet diversity in our societies, where we can engage with people who think differently and work differently. And that is so important. And also what the crisis has told us, today we, think about the pandemic, but the future is always going to surprise us. We, if you think around, climate change, we see it coming and it's going to impact our lives, our way of working, our ways of thinking. And that's not the only driving force. You can think about artificial intelligence pushing us to think so much harder about what makes us human. In education, we've done well to educate second-class robots, people who are good at repeating what we tell them. But now suddenly, computers can do that so much better. And so we need to go back to the drawing board. What makes us first-class humans in this new world? And then, there are lots of other forces as well that we actually need to study, need to think about, that shape our world. Now, when you look at the surface, our PISA assessment of global competency suggests that actually schools do quite a bit about this. Now, we ask school leaders in the OECD countries to what extent they cover global issues in their school curriculum. And you can see, pandemics was covered a little bit less, that hit us first, but still, about 80% of school leaders say, yeah, we talk about this. Climate change, almost 90%. So you can see actually schools are trying to build those issues into their agendas. If you look at this through the eyes of students, it becomes more interesting. You can see also here close to 80% of young people at the age of 15 saying, looking after the global environment is really important to me. I think of myself as a citizen of the world. When I see the poor conditions that some people in the world live under, I want to do something about it. But when you actually look to their agency, you can see only about 57% say, I can do something about the problems of the world. or I think my behavior can impact people in other countries. What you can see is students are aware, but they don't feel that sense of agency to change the world, to take action, to mobilize their cognitive, social, and emotional resources. And that's really what global competency is about. The question it tries to answer are very simple. Can you live with yourself? Can you live with other people? And can you live with this planet? So we try to look at, 4 big dimensions. The first is, to what extent young people are capable to combine what they know with reasoning about the world. If you drink a cup of coffee, in London or Paris, do you understand the implications it could have on workers, somewhere else on the other end of the world? But we also want to see to what extent young people can actually appreciate different ways of thinking, different ways of working. That is so important. Technology drives us in the other direction. Technology connects you with people who think like you, who look like you, who work like you. And it's actually becoming harder for people to get out of those echo chambers, these kind of artificial bubbles. Can you engage with people? Societies have always been most successful when they were able to capitalize on diversity. Very important question. And then, understanding is one thing, but can you engage in open, appropriate ways to communicate with people from other cultures, from other ways of thinking? And then ultimately, will you take action? So those are the questions that we studied. And when I show you, the first thing is, as always in PISA, we did a test. And you can see there's some familiar with, Singapore, does always well in reading, math, and science. And they also come out on top of the assessment of global competency. Not so much a surprise, you're going to see that. But I want to show you something. You can see that a country like Canada is also a very, very strong performer on global competencies. In fact, Canada does better on global competency than what you would predict from their performance in reading, mathematics, and science. Even more interestingly, Colombia, students struggle with reading, math, and science. They're not doing well on the PISA test. But, given their performance in reading, math, and science on global competency, they did remarkably well. That also shows, this was a war-torn country, a country, torn apart by civil strife, and that it put its act together to build social cohesion, to bring people together. And they put a lot of emphasis on this in the school system, and suddenly you can see actually it can be done. They still have to get better in reading, math, and science, but relative to this. On the other hand, you take a country like Korea, always one of the star performers in PISA, but when it comes to global competency, predicted on their performance in reading, math, and science, which is so great, they have a long way to go. So what I want to show you here is that global competency is not an automatic byproduct of being good at school. It is something in itself that we need to pay attention to. Now, when you ask yourself, why do countries do well on global competency? Here are some of the best predictors for this. Respect for people from other cultures. Attitudes, positive attitudes towards immigrants. Cognitive adaptability, resilience. Are you open to the novelty in the world? Are you prepared not just to learn, but also to unlearn and relearn when the world changes? Self-efficacy. Do you trust in your own abilities to make a difference? Awareness of global issues, perspective taking. Those were our best predictor. And they even, held after accounting for gender, immigrant background, and the demographic profile of people. So you can see, yes, reading, math, and science is important for global competency, but the attitudes that we create in young people, their aspirations, matter at least as much. Let's have a look at some of them. To what extent are people capable to understand, appreciate the perspectives and worldviews of others? When you look at students' understanding of the perspective of other people, you can see the majority say, I sometimes try to understand my friends better by imagining how things look from their perspective. I believe that there are always two sides to every question, and I try to look at both of them. So you can see actually there is a reasonable commitment among young people to be open to different perspectives. And that's the first ingredient you need to create global competency. Interestingly, girls do a lot better than boys on this. And if you look to the Middle East, isn't it interesting? The gender gap is biggest among all countries for which we have data in the United Arab Emirates. On the other side of the spectrum, Saudi Arabia has the smallest gender gap on this. So once again, you can see suddenly this is a mirror image of what we do in education. But overall, we must say girls are doing much better on this. Now, understanding the perspective of others is important. To what extent are young people interested in other cultures? Again, that's not so much predicted by the PISA performance. You can see, for example, a country like Turkey or Albania, Kosovo, Dominican Republic, very, very strong interest that young people display. Whereas, on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Slovak Republic, you have Italy, you have Hungary, Germany, countries that don't do so badly in terms of their cognitive outcomes, but you can see what students lack is that interest, to engage with the world, to see other perspectives. That's what we can and need to work on. What's also important, this is not so just about what teachers say, but it's also how teachers behave. When we ask students about discrimination in their classrooms, one thing that you could see very clearly is where students felt that their teachers were not valuing different perspectives, different cultures. Students tended to have much more negative attitudes to people from other cultures. Somehow that is a mirror image. The climate that you create as a teacher towards openness to other ways of thinking is immediately reflected in the views of students. We do not understand the causal nature of that relationship necessarily, but these things always tend to go together. So it's not just important, what you say as a teacher, but it's about who you are, how you behave. And there's a third dimension to this, and this is parents. You can actually see where students saw their parents to be interested in other cultures, and we surveyed parents as well. You could see that students are more interested in other cultures. So again, this is something where actually many shadows from the world reflect on students' own abilities. And we could see actually how all those issues were linked. The capability of young people to take different perspectives, to be open to the world, to be able and ready to unlearn and relearn things in new contexts, had a big impact on their respect for people from other cultures. And in turn, the respect for people had an impact on how open they were towards people with an immigrant background. Their cognitive adaptability, resilience, able to change your perspectives, your ideas, to be open for the novelty, also was related to this. The interest in learning about other cultures also predicted by the capacity of young people to take perspective. So these kind of factors are all closely knitted together. You work on one and you will work on others as well. So finally, what can we do about this? How can we educate people to live in an interconnected world? Well, when we surveyed school principals, you can see there's a lot of talk. In our school, students learn about different cultural perspectives on historical and social events. Now, most school principals say, yes, we do that in history and geography and other cultures. In our school, students learn about the cultures. Our school supports activities that encourage students' expression of diverse identities. Those things do happen. But when you actually look at to what extent do schools actually engage with other people, with other cultures, that is quite rare. So once again, you see that disconnect between, yes, we tick off the box, we, have discussed it in history, we have discussed it in geography, we've done our job, but actually, when it comes to the experience that young people have to engage with other cultures, that's very limited. And what our data show, this is precisely the point that matters. And now you see why some countries are so good on global competencies. For example, the actual action. Now, I mentioned was not so common overall, but you see countries like Singapore, like Panama, like Brazil are very, very good to bring, other religions, other cultures, other ways of thinking into the schooling day. They get, students out to celebrate, festivities with other cultures. Whereas on the other side, you can see in Italy, in Switzerland, in Saudi Arabia, that is very rare. But that's the window to global competencies. Not so much a school subject, it's very much the student's experience of diversity. Student exchanges, that's more difficult to organize. That's very expensive, but surprise, surprise, Singapore comes out as #1 as well. In fact, in Singapore, every middle school student gets a government-sponsored experience overseas. Singapore is not a very generous country when it comes to spending money on education. The budget on education is very small, but this is something they prioritize because they understand how important it is to shape attitudes in openness. So when you see sort of Singapore coming out so well on global competencies, there are clear reasons for this. Whereas in countries like Peru and Colombia, these things are expensive. It's not so easy to do. Finally, the number of learning activities that students do in school, very, very strong. Again, countries like the Philippines, Dominican Republic, Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand. Countries where this is still quite rare, Hungary, Slovenia, and the country where I live in, France. Basically, school is not the place where you engage with other cultures, other society. And later on, these are also among the countries that have a lot of difficulty and trouble with global competency in there. So we shouldn't perhaps surprise them this. Why it is so important? Because once again, the number of learning activities relates very strongly to students' attitudes. Where students are more interested in other cultures, where they are more aware of global issues, where they have a greater sense of agency, you can really see that's where they have more positive attitudes towards global competencies. Final word on teachers. We asked teachers to what extent they need more professional development for teaching in cultural diverse student populations. And you can see countries like Brazil, Chile, Korea, teachers expressed a strong need for it. Whereas in the United Arab Emirates, that is already very well normal for teachers. You are accustomed to teaching students from many different kind of backgrounds. So you have much lower rate of teachers for whom that is still a struggle. And I'll leave it here, John. I've exhausted my 15 minutes, but this is just to give you a taste of what we can do about this. What you can see really is that this is not rocket science. This is actually something that is quite easy to do. It's about creating space in every subject area. And you can do that as well in mathematics as you do that in history, creating space for students to experience the different perspectives and views that this world offers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Andreas. That was wonderful. And as you know, I will be coming back to you later with lots of questions, other little issues that we'd like just to probe with you and get seek the value of the benefit of your experience and advice on. But for the moment, thanks a lot, Andreas. As many of you will know, the Bussola Institute was established as a bridge to provide better understanding and greater cooperation between Europe and the Gulf. And to date, a number of GCC countries have participated in our events, attended our activities, people from those countries have written papers for us, and so on. But as this is the first occasion when the Sultanate of Oman has represented the region at one of our activities, we consider it a particular honor to be joined by Her Excellency Dr. Madiha Ahmed Nasser Al-Shaibaniya and her colleague, Dr. Zuwaina, whom I will introduce later. Dr. Madiha is the Minister of Education in Oman. She is also the chairperson of the Omani National Commission for Education, Culture and Science. She served previously as the permanent delegate of Oman at UNESCO. And Dr. Madiha graduated from the University of California, Santa Barbara, with a PhD in education. She will speak to us today about Oman's Vision 2040 and the role that quality education will have in its ambitious objectives, the future of the Sultanate. Dr. Madiha, over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and to participate in this forum. I was very much impressed with the global competency framework, and I believe it's extremely important that it's integrated within our education systems with all the challenges that the world is facing as we move through the coming years. I I'm going to talk, we are at a crossroads. We just completed our Vision 2020, which initially embarked on a ambitious reform for education over the past 20 years. And we are now moving towards our Vision 2040, which is also a very ambitious vision and for the country, and education plays a fundamental role in what is going to be happening in the next 40 years. There is a big focus on innovation in terms of the economy, in terms of education, promoting also values of entrepreneurship in our young generation. There's a big focus also on governance, that it is important that we have KPIs for our performance, especially within the education system. And this is something that we've been working on over the past decade. And I think one of the areas that we are happy with the progress is with our international testing. We are not where we would like to be, but I think we are moving there in a steady way. We've worked very much and very hard, and this is also part of our 2040 vision, on building capacity in terms of teachers and professional development. We believe that the quality of what we do depends vitally on what our teachers, how they deliver and how they're empowered to do what they do inside the classrooms. So this is vital for us. We are looking at also benchmarking ourselves. I think it's important that knowing what we do, and with any education system, you are performing as per your standards, your goals, but you need to look at yourself in terms of where the world is heading and where you would like to be, and have a clear target in terms of that. Technology also is playing a big role in terms of what needs to be done. And I think COVID has accelerated the efforts with all countries. Me and Andreas had several discussions. I'm very careful with technology because I want the evidence. I want to make sure that when you do integrate the technology, it's conducive to learning, and you can show that it's actually improving student performance, and it's promoting the values that Andreas was talking about. And I think it's important that when we do use technology, we look at also the social aspects, the cultural aspects. And I think technology is a strong tool, and we're moving towards that also. One of the other areas also that we're focusing on is with STEM education, like many countries, and kind of the relevance, linking what our outcomes with the labor market. And we are currently looking at having several streams, the technical streams and vocational streams, that would actually meet the needs of the labor market. But I think rather than not simply saying that you have streams, I think we had this discussion also, it's the adaptability of our graduates, that they need to be able to adapt with the requirements of the labor market. We know that things are changing so fast with the fourth industrial revolution, and we hope that our graduates are going to be innovators. They're going to be looking for solutions. And then I think in the midst of all of this, of everything that is happening, this has been an integral part of what we do very early on, is creating a citizen who who's looking at the world and appreciating the worldviews of others. Cultural diversity and accepting the other and rapprochement of cultures. This has always been an important part of what we do. It's in our national strategy of education. It's in our philosophy. What we have done is we have updated our philosophy, and one of the things that we were very committed to including in our philosophy was sustainable development and these values for sustainable development and climate change, the whole concept of being a climate change, being able to promote like using alternative energy, because we know now with what's happening in this part of the world with the oil crisis, I think we are also looking at alternative energy. And in fact, we have several schools that have initiatives using solar energy, and that's just like an example that we have there. We have also, one of the things that we are looking at, we have promoted the use of international standards in our curriculum in terms of assessment. We are hoping to have an assessment system that's internationally recognized. My colleague here, Dr. Zwina, will talk more about it. She was involved in executing a lot of the studies. We feel, going back to indicators, we feel indicators tell a story, but they don't tell the whole story. We feel the indicators tell you that you have an issue here, there's a concern here, but then you need to dig further to go back and try to understand what is it that needs to be done and that needs immediate attention. We're hoping with our Vision 2040 that in terms of education, we will be able to enable our students to be competent with technology, to be aware of global issues. You spoke about the SDGs, and it's important. And I think for us, in many sectors in the government, SDGs are a big part of what we look at. It's almost become like a common terminology. Everybody understands that we need to be working in this direction. One of the areas that I think, and I really want to connect my discussion also with the global competency framework. I think one of the good experiences that Oman has had, or one of the good projects that we've had several projects where we've done, because I know Andreas was talking about, how do you train teachers? How do you ensure that this is actually happening? You have it in your curriculum. It is being discussed in the classrooms, but then how do you make sure that it carries on further than that? We have worked on a document for competences for the 21st century. It's still a document in the works, but Oman has been successful with a lot of these programs. We had a program called Connecting Cultures, which linked, it was done within the realm of the Euro-Arab dialogue. So they would bring in students from different parts of the country, from the Arab world, and students from Europe. And it would bring them together for 2 weeks, and they would go on these camping trips in the desert. And they would have these facilitators where they would be discussing all these misconceptions each side has about the other. So this has been a very successful program, and I think it was recognized by the Alliance of Civilizations. Unfortunately, it has stopped, I think, due to some budgeting restraints, but we're hoping it will pull off. We're also doing a lot of these twinning programs through UNESCO associated schools. And it doesn't only have to be through UNESCO associated schools. Twinning programs, we were talking about technology, and I think Andreas mentioned that unfortunately with technology, we tend, especially the young generation, they tend to cling to people who are like them. And they follow and they imitate and they learn from each other. Maybe technology can be used at a time like this to promote these twinning programs. And it's less expensive. Kids are already out there on platforms. We have developed platforms. So twinning programs, I think, is a good way if they are supervised rather than just they're supervised to make sure that we're promoting some of the values and skills that Andreas discussed. I think it's important. Many of the countries in the region are focusing big time on the cognitive aspect. We want better results in mathematics. We want better results in reading, in numeracy. But I think we have the two have to go in line with each other. So I think in a nutshell, unless you want me to add, and I'll give time to my colleague, Dr. Zuina, perhaps to go more into detail in terms of Oman's participation in international testing, but that's what I have to say in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And indeed, you've even answered some of the questions I was going to ask you, which is wonderful. Thank you so much. You covered so many areas, and the very best of luck with Vision 2040. I've read through it, and it's hugely interesting, and I think it will be extremely good for your education system. I now turn to Dr. Zuina, as Her Excellency said. And Dr. Zuina is the Director General of the Center for Educational Assessment and Measurement at the Ministry of Education in Oman. She's a member of the Standing Committee of the IEA, the International Association for the Evaluation of Educational Achievement. Dr. Zuina graduated from the University of Liverpool with a PhD in mathematics education. And she has one other thing that I want to thank her for. I mentioned early on that Bussola was a bridge between GCC countries and European Union countries. But Zuina, over the past couple of weeks, has been a brilliant bridge between us and the Ministry of Education in Oman and indeed Her Excellency, the Minister. So Dr. Zuina will talk to us now, and it can be reasonably brief, about the importance of educational evaluation in Oman and provide a Gulf perspective on the value of international assessments like PISA. Thanks, Rina. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I'm so grateful for the invitation and take part in these webinar sessions. And I'm going to talk about the benefits of participating in international study, and also what our plan for the future. We believe that in order to develop an education system, the country should have a clear vision to move toward the planning future goals. Moreover, along this path, we need to have indicators from national and international that can facilitate our research-based decision toward the improvement. The indicators help us to identify the strength that we highlight and stress on, and the weakness which we are improving. This is the path that Oman has taken in order to move toward implementing our visions. First, the Ministry of Education focused in implementing national studies with our external education expert partners like the World Bank. And also Oman has participated in IEA international study, such as TIMSS and PIRS. Our first participation was in TIMSS 2007. And we still continue to participate and compare the indicators from the different cycles, monitoring the reform initiatives, and give an insight of actual finding that leads us to further improvement. Currently, our major sources of indicators beside the national studies are the indicators obtained from implementing IEA studies, TIMSS and PIRS. Indicators had facilitate our development plans and decisions that had a great impact on the reform for curriculum, assessment, and teacher preparation, pre and in-service program. Still, we are utilizing these wealthy data toward our development plans. We are implementing, in Oman, we are implementing yearly national tests for grade 4, 7, and 10. And we are using the indicator to improve level of learning, teaching, and student performance and acquire skills. As we all know that IEA studies are implemented for certain specific grade 4 and grade 8. We believe that it is now the time to implement international study for grade 10, as it is considered the final grade for basic education in Oman. Therefore, Oman is planning to participate in PISA study, which targeted students at age of 15 at grade 10. Those students are in grade 10 in Oman, to measure the basic education outcomes and measuring student knowledge, skills, and competencies, as well the wider range of 21st century skills beyond mathematics, science, and reading. We believe that will equip them for success in education and to equip skills that they can practically use them in their life and the world of work. The indicator will help us to empower schools leaders and teachers by providing them with the evidence-based analysis of their students' performance. Also, this study will provide us with the valuable information in the learning environment within a school, student, home background, and motivation of learning. Implementing PISA will continue to provide us global peer learning, building capacity opportunities. So the plan of Oman is to participate in PISA 2025. And we already sent our letter to Andreas. The Ministry of Education in Oman will continue to measure our outcomes nationally and internationally, and will continue to implement different initiatives to develop the system to meet the Vision 2040. 2040 goal, that is strategic direction, inclusive education, lifelong learning, and scientific research that lead to a knowledge society and competitive national talent. I'm grateful for this great opportunity to share our experience in implementing international study and utilizing the data and use the indicators to make research-based decisions for our future reform plans and developing initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Zuena, and we'll develop maybe some of these points a little later with Andreas as well. So thank you very, very much. That was excellent. I'd now like to introduce Edward Mortar. Edward is currently a member of the board of directors of Ireland's Educational Research Centre. He's a former deputy chair of the OECD Evaluation and Assessment Expert Group. He's a former division manager in inspection and monitoring division of Abu Dhabi Education Council, where he led the delivery of a high-quality inspection program of private and government schools. And prior to that, he was assistant chief inspector in Ireland's Department of Education and Skills, where he also served as the head of the department's evaluation support and research unit. He has extensive experience in measuring quality in school provision and in providing solutions to improving the quality of curriculum, teaching and learning. Over to you, Edward.
John, first of all, thank you very much to the Bussola Institute for this opportunity to be in such distinguished company to talk about such an important topic as developing global competences for our students. Like yourself, John, I grew up in Ireland in the latter half of the 20th century. And during the course of my primary, secondary, and third level education, I never encountered a single fellow student who was born outside of Ireland. I'm making this full and frank disclosure to perhaps admit to some possible global incompetence on my part due to my lack of exposure to perspectives and worldviews of others during my formative years. However, hopefully I have managed to compensate for that through my experiences in working in a couple of countries and most recently in the Gulf, where indeed one saw interactions with other nationalities at a very high level. I say this not to just indicate how long I have been around, but also just to underline both the scale of the change that has taken place in our country and indeed in other countries, and the speed of the change, so that people are now far more mobile, they're far more likely to move about in their lifetimes for both educational and for work purposes. Against this background, I would just like to say we're indebted to Andreas and to the OECD for their pioneering work, not only about global competences, but also in shaping thinking about education, especially over the past 3 decades with the advent of PISA. They have done this by groundbreaking research and analysis of the attitudes, skills, knowledge, and indeed values that today's students need to have so that they will function effectively in tomorrow's world. So why should we focus on global competences? The proposition for me is pretty self-evidently true, but one of the most striking quotes from the framework that the OECD produced, the document entitled Preparing Our Youth for an Inclusive and Sustainable World, was the following: ethno-cultural conflicts have become the most common source of political violence in the world, and they show no sign of abating. That sentence for me sums up why global competence needs to be at the center of both the political and the educational agenda. Lack of empathy and cultural understanding are at the root of many of the conflicts that we have in our world today. A second reason that young people in particular need to develop global competences is to combat the growing threat posed to the functioning of democratic societies. These threats are manifested through misinformation, fake news, the manipulation of mainstream media and social media. And we have had very recent experience of these real and present dangers. And as a previous speaker said, young people are very attracted to these kind of echo chambers and are likely to follow the crowd rather than become independent thinkers. Finally, lest we think that young people are already equipped to cope, we should bear in mind one of the startling findings of PISA 2018, that is that only 1 in 9 15-year-old students was able to distinguish between fact and opinion. I found that a very startling finding. Just 1 in 9 was able to tell what a fact was and what was the opinion of some other person. And that is one of the key global competences that students will need to navigate the murky channels of social media. More than ever, I believe students need critical thinking to identify what are described as the hidden forces that shape what they believe, and the discernment to know what is reliable and what isn't. World economies are becoming more interdependent. Societies and communities are becoming increasingly linguistically and culturally diverse. And global challenges such as the pandemic, natural disasters, global warming, poverty, they're increasing in frequency and in intensity. And therefore, enhancing our students with global competences will greatly assist them in navigating this growingly complex landscape throughout their lives. Just to talk a little bit about what our starting point is, we're not starting with a clean slate. The curricula in Ireland, and I'm sure in other countries over the past 50 years, at both primary and secondary level, have contained elements designed to increase students' knowledge about people of other countries. However, traditional curricula were often limited to knowing about people, where global competency goes beyond a prescribed set of facts. It envisages exploring how others' lives are shaped and what we share with them and what our interdependencies are. More recently, many countries, including the Gulf countries, some Gulf countries have overlaid their curricula with what are known as 21st century skills, such as creativity, critical thinking, entrepreneurship, collaborative problem solving, and communication skills. Introducing the 21st century agenda in education has been achieved largely by embedding and overlaying knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values across existing curriculum areas such as civics, social and political and environmental education. Promotion of students' concepts of tolerance, respect, empathy, and care have also been integrated into curriculum activities. Our focus is on action to include global competence through the education system, but past experience would suggest that the support of the wider society will greatly help schools to succeed. Young people's development of global competence needs to begin at the family and the community level first. So they need to become locally competent, as well as working at the community level. These issues can be addressed more formally within the school. Otherwise, there's a danger that students and young people may see global competence as an academic exercise, and it may not be practiced in their social and in their working lives. Communication across communities and cultures has been made much easier through international travel, better language education, and through increased and more sophisticated use of technologies. And it's perhaps one of the things we can say about the pandemic is that it perhaps has forced educators into exploring much more deeply how those technologies can be used, and perhaps it could be, I know the OECD has already looked into this, but I think it would be very valuable to do some detailed research on what has been the impact of students learning through through technology rather than through face-to-face attendance in classrooms. I believe that the Global Competence Initiative is pushing an open door. Children are dreamers, teenagers are idealists, and adults are pragmatists. We've had very recent evidence of young people's awareness of global issues through the movement to tackle climate change, led by Greta Thunberg. So young people's awareness of global issues are already growing, and the goal to promote young people's understanding of the world and empower them to express their views in society, I think will find ready acceptance with young people. The development of global competences through education, through the education system, it needs to begin, I believe, in the preschool, where children need to experience respect, empathy, resilience, and tolerance being modeled, being promoted, and being practiced. Opportunities for inculcation and enculturation of these values should be an integral part of all education activities right throughout the educational life of every student. Andreas said that what he was talking about wasn't rocket science, but in my experience, making changes in an education system is not rocket science. It's much more difficult than that. Clearly, there needs to be a public policy initiative to start a conversation and to highlight the need to strengthen the roles of education systems in developing global competence. The dialogue can and perhaps needs to be led by education ministries, and also needs to be taken up by the curriculum development agencies to see what can be done at every level of the education system, so that children's learning in these areas becomes a kind of a spiraled experience for them, where they learn as much as they can and as they need to at different stages of development. Since teachers play a key role, each education system needs to examine how we can best inform teachers to undertake this important work. Schools and teachers need to know what the priorities are, because these will be different in every single school. A possible starting point could be a toolkit, perhaps based on the PISA framework, to assist schools in conducting an assessment of where they are now, and to identify what their priorities are. So, in conclusion, I believe that this is a very important conversation for schools to have. That the results of that Andreas has presented today, and indeed in previously, there's lots of surprises there, I think, for us here in Ireland. It's interesting to see the major gender gap that we have in students' understanding, even though we're among the most literate of the OECD and EU countries in PISA. Yet being literate doesn't necessarily therefore lead to a very high level of understanding of global competencies and how to understand how other people live. So we need to begin to teach our students how to walk in other people's shoes, to understand the challenges and the advantages that other people have in different countries. And I think there are a lot of good suggestions have come from Dr. Madiha about what they intend to do, and perhaps there's room for inter-global collaboration on this very important issue. So thank you very much again, John, for the opportunity to share some thoughts on that issue.
Thanks, Edward. Before we continue, I'd like just to ask a question of our panelists first. Not a question that you need to answer apart from. Normally, our webinars last 1 hour. Are you all okay to go on for about another 20 minutes or so?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Okay, Andreas. Great. There are a few key questions that I'd particularly like to come back and ask Andreas. And I just start by saying, were there any big surprises for you in the results that came from 2018?
Your mic is muted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think the biggest surprise was the countries that may not have done so well on academic skills, but that came out really strongly on the global competency assessment, showing that actually this is not, a natural byproduct of good education, but it's something that you need to pay additional attention to.
Great. Do you feel, Andreas, for example, that teachers are sufficiently well trained to ensure that this is happening in their classrooms and in their schools? And do you feel that it needs a special subject on its own, or should it be built in good schools into the ethos of the school? I know I've asked a couple of questions there to do with teacher training, curriculum, and also ethos.
Yeah, we did ask the teachers to what extent they felt prepared. And in some countries, there's a large share of teachers who say we are unprepared, even though it was included in our training. So they don't feel that what training they got was actually relevant. In other countries, that share is smaller. What we don't know to what extent teachers are actually aware of what the challenge is. So in some countries where, few teachers say, I need better training, maybe teachers did not, were aware of what, the future of global competency really looks like. So that's, I think, something more difficult to assess. On your question, should it be a special subject? I'm actually very skeptical of those approaches. What often happens is that we layer subject after subject on young people. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, our education systems become a mile wide and an inch deep. Today it's global competency, tomorrow it's going to be environmental literacy, then comes someone with financial literacy. And I also think if we do that with global competency, the message we pass on to the majority of teachers is you don't have to worry about it. There's some specialist, who does a subject about this. I do believe that actually global competency is about the heart of the values in our education system. And you want every teacher in your school to own this. And I do think that every school subject actually provides a space for, intercultural awareness, for, appreciating other ways of thinking. If you go to a mathematics classroom and you teach students this, here's a problem, here's one solution. That's one way. But if you actually get students to think and engage in different kinds of solutions, you debate and negotiate them, you can actually do that in every subject. And I therefore think if you want to make this a collective responsibility of schools, I don't think a special subject it helps you with that.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you 100%. To go back a minute to what the work you've done, and the survey components, you devised them obviously with great care and great skill. And in my view, they could prove very useful to schools, if the schools adapted them and modified them to suit the different age groups. Do you encourage that, or what's your view on that, Andreas?
Yeah, actually, our policy at the OECD is always that we make our instruments a kind of global public good. We publish the framework and we welcome, actually many countries are using and adopting it. We also have not just the big PISA, but we have a schools-based PISA that we offer individual schools, and many schools are very interested in this. So we do encourage this. I think it's also good if countries make their own efforts to adapt the instrument. You cannot always fit it directly. Yeah, absolutely. We want this to be a public good, and it's up to countries to see how to take it forward in the national context, apart, of course, from the PISA that we do. But that's our general philosophy. We have done that also in the earlier PISA when we assessed social competencies, collaborative problem solving. Many countries have taken that on board and used it in their schools. And I also, obviously I'm a greatly committed to international assessments, but actually, I think bringing those results back to schools is the most important challenge. If we just, have a 30,000 feet perspective of a photograph of a country, that's not going to help to change things on the ground. So I think building instruments that actually translate this into results that help students learn better, teachers teach better, and schools to work more effectively is a very important goal for us in the OECD.
Great. Just as you were talking there about some schools participated, others, or countries, and others didn't, did you find there was any initial maybe skepticism, or indeed maybe even resistance, when you decided to introduce this global competence dimension into PISA 2018? I'd just love to hear your views on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that was, you asked me about surprises. That perhaps was the biggest surprise for me, how contentious something that seems so human. We are not talking about, geopolitics. Global competency is about a very human attribute. Are you open to other people, other cultures, other ideas, other ways of thinking? And I would not have expected this to be contentious, but you take countries like the United States and the UK that choose, not to have to do anything with this. And I also think, some countries thought, well, global competency detracts from, national identity. For me, they are the two sides of the same coin. You do not understand your own language until you learn a foreign language. That's the first time you start to think about this construct and idea of language. And I think the same is true with culture. You do not understand your own culture, your own identity, until you learn to look at your culture from an outside perspective, from a different lens. So I think actually the best way to strengthen, identity in a country is to teach global competency. I would even go one step further. I would make the same argument about religion. We grow up with our own religion, but actually the moment we really understand it, when we actually learn to at least cognitively engage with other religions. So I think actually, it's a very, I could not understand why some countries choose not to do this, but
Sure.
That's the reality. And the good thing is, 66 countries took part at the end, after the initial controversy.
More will want to take part in the future, I can assure you. Just one thing that occurred to me listening to you there about, even when you were doing your initial introduction, you were talking about the pronounced gender differences in the results. And something occurred to me. Did the results enable you, for example, identify how immigrants fared in particular countries in the area of global competence?
Yeah, we looked at that separately. Immigrants generally do better on global competency, and that is probably not so much a surprise because they have that in their own history, their family, they have been to other places, other cultures, so generally they find it easier. The gap is particularly large in Europe, where immigrants generally have more positive attitudes to other cultures. It's easier for them to show cognitive resilience. No, I think that's pretty consistent pictures across countries.
Great. I'll move a
and
little.
Actually, the other part is the other part of the equation is also interesting. We ask, what are the conditions under which other students have more positive attitudes towards immigrants? And that's also really interesting. Basically, the number one predictor is to have met other people from other cultures. It didn't matter very much what you were taught in school, what your teachers were saying, but if among your friends in your classroom, you had students from different cultures, you were more likely to have, interest and positive attitudes towards them. So the result is their school system segregates students, which is still often the case, by social background or by other means. Actually, you prevent that opportunity and you actually then reduce the scope that people have for other cultures.
Great, brilliant. I'll move a little bit away and maybe move a bit towards post-COVID education. And you mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned something that you tweeted a while back and that I read with great interest. And that's that COVID shows us that the future likes to surprise us. And then on exploring alternative futures for education, help systems better prepare us for unexpected shocks. In that context, but thinking ahead to the next round of PISA, which was supposed to have been this year, but because of COVID will now be in 2022. Based on your experience, do you expect that the fallout from COVID will have a noticeable impact maybe on the PISA results of 22?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, yes. What I think you're going to see is just a widening of existing disparities. Yes. Students from well-off families that had learned how to learn, that could, manage their own learning, that had access to good digital technology, very supportive parents, probably for them, you won't see that much of a difference. But for the many students who had never learned to learn on their own, who were spoon-fed by their teachers, who did not have access to good technology, who didn't have parents, watching that they pay attention, you will see big learning losses. Now, I think that is pretty evident already now. And add to this that for many young people, school is not just, a place where you learn. School is also a very important social environment. Now, for many young people, it's unfortunately the most predictable, the most stable environment they have. So suddenly that breaks down. It will be very, very hard to re-engage many young people. I think that is unfortunately the reality that we see. And that is why it's so important to keep schools open as quickly as countries can. And I think there is good progress on that front, but B is to, redouble the investment in the students that have, lost out, to basically prioritize learning for disadvantaged students, prioritize learning for the youngest. That's where digital technology has done very little. And unfortunately, you're going to see big disparities. And I think they will go show up in the PISA results. I have no doubt about that.
Yes. And on that whole area of digital and of technology, Dr. Mediha spoke about how maybe not skepticism, but he needs to analyze carefully why we should use technology in schools and how should we use it. During COVID, in many countries, technology and remote learning became essential, I suppose, lifelines for education when the COVID crisis struck. And many teachers were neither, well, maybe say, very experienced in educating their kids in this way, and so on. Would you like to comment, maybe, Andreas, on teachers' preparedness in general to support digital learning, and how well, for example, they've been trained in the past, or they still are in the use of information and communication technologies?
Yeah, but as a preface to this, and I think it's really our results raise some cautions about the technology intensity in general. I think we do not see this clearly positive effects in normal times. I think we just have to see that learning, particularly for young children, is largely a relational, a social process, and actually technology often can disrupt that. It can make learning more superficial, more less interactive, less. So I think we need to be cautious about it. But this being said, in this crisis, obviously, that's been the only game in town. Yes. So I think we have seen big gaps on the technology front, big gaps in teacher preparation. Also, teachers have largely used technology to conserve existing practice. Do their lessons by Zoom, not to transform educational practice. Now, I think that's been a big drawback. And so I think we have not seen that much of the benefits of technology. We have more seen the kind of limitations in this COVID pandemic. Some countries have done better than others. And I think the big differentiator is not whether we train teachers up front, but whether teachers actually are the designers of technology-based learning environments. If you look to countries that have gone well through this, and again, you reach Korea, you reach Singapore, China, Estonia. The one common thing is that they do not, just dump solutions into classrooms, but their teachers, are engaged in collaborative and professional learning communities where they actually are the designers of learning environments and new technologies. And I think you cannot short circuit that. It's not about you just, training courses for teachers. And last but not least, count on your students. I think what we missed in this crisis is actually to capitalize on a lot of expertise in young people, by, again, looking for outside providers rather than solutions from within the system.
Great. And one last question to you, Andreas. You fielded a lot of them, but just one, and it's to do with financing, because as you know, historically, we all know in our countries, historically across the world, government funding on education often fluctuates depending on the country's priorities. And especially now in response to the massive external shocks to the economies caused by COVID. What do you think will be the impact of the COVID crisis on the public financing of education, particularly in the foreseeable future?
Well, actually, I think you will see a polarization like we did in the financial crisis. And I think This is the moment where you see whether a country has an interest in its future.
Sure.
I think the biggest decision that any society, any country needs to make every day, every individual, how do I trade, my current situation against my future? We have to do that with the environment. We have to do that on the financing. We have to do this with education. And I think countries make very different decisions here. What you could see when the financial crisis struck, the US had a big cut in education expenditure. They put all of the money into current expenditure. You could see a country like Japan, actually, that was the moment for them to increase their investment in the future. And I think those are you will not see a kind of single answer to this. I think like in the financial crisis, you're going to see some countries that are spending less, and some countries that will redouble their efforts. You know, why is the latter sensible? For several reasons. A, because you know, this COVID crisis has made many changes in our labor markets permanent. You know, AI technology will lead to a permanent change in skill demand, so we need to sort of upgrade those kinds of skills. But the other part is simply, you know, in the post-COVID environment, employment for young people is going to be very, very tough. So this is the moment to use their time to actually build better skills. And I think many countries get that message, will put the resources into this, but not all. I think you're going to see it's going in both directions.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. And unfortunately, we've come to the end of our webinar. I wish we had another 2 hours, but I know that people have other commitments. So before we come to the end, before we totally wrap up, I have another piece of news that I'd like to share with our audience today. And that is that the Bussola Institute has been working with Andreas and the OECD PISA team over the last year or so to support the kind of analysis that Andreas is talking about today, and indeed even more in-depth analysis that is currently being worked on at the moment. As you saw from what was presented by Andreas, these data that came from that study demonstrate a great richness and significance. And as a result of that, the OECD and Bussola will co-host a World Forum on Global Competence, which will take place later this year. And we're working on a plan for that, which we will indeed be announcing in the near future. It will involve leaders, policymakers, and educators from countries across the world. And this forum will also provide us with the opportunity to launch a report which will showcase real-world examples of international best practice in global competence education. And the OECD is currently working on finalizing this report together with the Project Zero team at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So finally, and sadly, because we could have gone on for a lot longer, on behalf of the Board of Directors of Bussola, and on my own behalf, I extend my sincerest and heartfelt thanks to everybody who was involved in today's webinar. We're hugely grateful to our 4 outstanding and distinguished expert panelists: Andreas, Her Excellency Dr. Madiha, Dr. Ina, and Edward. I thank you very much for your insightful analysis, your frank views, and your forward-looking visions. I also want to warmly thank each one of our attendees today, and we've quite a lot of them. And we look forward very much to meeting you all soon again. And finally, a special word of appreciation also to the entire team at the Bussola Institute. Thank you all very, very much. And it was a great pleasure to meet you here today. Thank you so much.